all over the world, pastors have been talking about and working on doing worship services in a world where social distancing is either mandated or strongly suggested by government officials. Throughout history, a Christian worship service, whether done on Saturday, Sunday, or any other day of the week, has included 4 basic components: songs, sermons, sacraments, and supplication. Christian worship also usually has an offering, and unfortunately, modern worship services are loaded with announcements, which is an odd use of limited worship time in an age when more and better communication platforms than any other time in history are available. But for some strange reason, we present a long list of announcements that are quickly forgotten. Historically, a Christian worship service begins with a call to worship. This was often in history in the Western church a church bell ringing or later on organ music playing, and people knew it is time to gather to worship. Then after the songs are sung, the sermon is preached, the sacraments are served, supplication are presented to God, then the congregation that has been called together to worship is now sent out into the world on mission to be a witness to friends and family and neighbors. They have been equipped and empowered through the worship service to give an account for the hope that is in Christ. Weekend worship, as we all know, is an essential part of a church's rhythm, but it's not all a healthy church does. It's maybe half. The other half is small group discipleship. Acts 2:46 says, "Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts." This shows us that the church in Acts met in large gatherings in the temple and in small groups in the home. Jesus did life and ministry much the same way. He held large gatherings, sometimes numbering in the thousands, where he preached the good news, healed the sick, fed the hungry. And he had his small group of 12 disciples. Sometimes he made it even smaller, meeting with maybe his executive team of the big 3 of Peter, James, and John. Large worship gatherings and small discipleship groups. That's how Jesus did ministry. That's how the original church in Acts did ministry. That's probably a good idea for us to follow that pattern as well as much as we can. Previously, we talked about online worship and how to do it more effectively. How to, whether it's preaching or the technical side or the music components and even communion and offerings. Now I'd like to talk about relational discipleship in an online world. Like weekend worship, relational discipleship is best done in a group. Quarantine and social distancing make group activities difficult at best and in some situations impossible. This does not mean that discipleship should be put on pause during times of quarantine. If you have to put the brakes on anything during the crisis, please don't slow down your church's discipleship. I think times like these demand that we put both feet on the discipleship accelerator, not on the brake. But how do we do that and social distance? Let's start with Jesus' command to make disciples. His last words to his disciples before his ascension are recorded in Matthew 28:19. He says this, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." No one who heard these words interpreted them as a call to find followers of Jesus, enroll them in a church program designed to make them better church members. That's pretty much what the modern church has turned discipleship into, a church program to make better church members. When the original 12, minus Judas, heard Jesus commission them to go and make disciples, every one of them interpreted that to mean he wanted them to go to people who did not know him, who were not following him. When they got to those people, their job was to introduce them to Jesus, to baptize them, to teach them to obey his word. That's biblical discipleship. But is that even possible when we're required to keep our distance from one another? I hope so. We have no choice but to do all we can, to do all he calls to do, no matter what the obstacles or opposition. In the next few minutes, I want to give my best answers to 3 essential questions about relational discipleship in the context of social distancing and mandated quarantines. Question 1, what is a disciple? Question 2, what is discipleship? And question 3, how does discipleship happen? Question 1, what is a disciple? A disciple is not a church member who is more mature, more committed, more spiritual, more radical than other church members. If we look at how Jesus called his first disciples, we see clearly what a disciple is. Matthew 4:19 through 22. He said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw 2 brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. So whether we're in the normal world as it's been or the social distancing world we're in now, based on the original call to discipleship, what is a disciple? First, a disciple is a person who answers the call to follow Jesus. Not to join a church, not to join a small group, not to join a program, to follow Jesus. That's the starting line. Second, Jesus promised that he would make his followers fishers of men. This made sense to Peter and Andrew because they were professional fishermen. That was their family business. If they had been farmers, maybe Jesus would have said, "Follow me and I will make you harvesters of men." The point is, the original discipleship group was never designed to be Jesus and only the 12. They were supposed to fish for others or harvest others. Now in Matthew 28, after 3 years of being discipled by Jesus, he's sending them out to fish for men, to make disciples. There's another principle we can learn from Matthew 4. If these brothers, Peter and Andrew, wanted to follow Jesus, they would have to follow along with each other and with the other 10 who would eventually answer the call to follow. And not just those other 10, but there were others along the way. Discipleship is not a one-on-one venture. It's a team thing. Jesus quickly added James and John to the group. Then he added others. So a disciple is a person who follows Jesus, fishes for men, and does that in fellowship with others. Follow, fish, fellowship. These are the foundational pillars of relational discipleship. This doesn't change in times of health crisis or financial crisis. The 3 activities at the core of relational discipleship, follow, fish, fellowship, become even more vital during times of crisis. Question number 2, whether we're in a health crisis or whether it's just normal life, the question is, what is discipleship? If a disciple is a person who follows Jesus, fishes for people, and does this in fellowship with other disciples, then discipleship is the process, the journey of helping people follow Jesus, helping people fish for others, helping people walk in fellowship with other Jesus followers. As my good friend and colleague Joey Bonifacio always says, discipleship is relationship. Discipleship is not a church program to make better, more committed church members. It's not a class, it's not a course, it's not a book. It's a relationship with Jesus, a relationship with lost people, and a relationship with believers. Following Jesus is relational. Fishing for people is about building relationships with people who do not yet know Jesus. Fellowship is building relational communities with fellow believers. So discipleship is relationship on 3 levels: with Jesus, with non-Christians, and with fellow Christians. In the season we're in right now all over the world, we will not be able to do a lot of the discipleship activities we're used to doing. But if we think of discipleship as relationship, as helping others follow Jesus, helping others fish, helping others fellowship, then I'm sure discipleship can flourish even while we practice social distancing. While it's not the same as face-to-face interaction, I am grateful for the technology that enables us to stay relationally connected even during this season of time. The third question: how does relational discipleship happen when we're living in times of mandated quarantine and social distancing? Remember that many of our fellow believers throughout history, even in our lifetime in certain nations, have been unable to meet together in large groups because of government-mandated persecution. I've learned much about corporate worship and relational discipleship from my Chinese and Iranian friends who have been doing worship and discipleship underground for decades. Simply put, here's how we do relational discipleship, whether in public or underground, in free societies where the church is persecuted, in times of social connection and social distancing. No matter the circumstance, here's how discipleship happens. First, we engage our community and our culture with the gospel. Since many of us are not allowed to meet face to face, we can't engage our neighbors as we once did. But I'm sure if we ask God for wisdom, we'll find a way to engage with the gospel. This package of videos includes a video of several Every Nation leaders talking about how they're engaging their communities while keeping their distance. I think it'll spark some ideas for engaging your unique community. Second, we establish biblical foundations. Third, we equip believers to do basic ministry. And fourth, we empower all disciples to make disciples by engaging their communities with the gospel, establishing biblical foundations, equipping everyone for ministry, and empowering discipleship. Along with this video primer on relational discipleship in the time of health crisis, we've produced brief videos on engaging, establishing, equipping, and empowering when we can't gather together. Each video features practical ideas and testimonies from Every Nation leaders from all over the world. I think they'll encourage you as you continue to make disciples in these uncertain times. No matter our circumstances, we are called to follow Jesus as disciples. We are called to go and make disciples of all nations. May God bless you and your church as you follow Him and help others follow Him.